Layla Hassan's story begins in the industrial city of Leeds, United Kingdom, where she was born on November 15, 1987, into a family of Pakistani immigrants. Her parents, Said and Fatima Hassan, had arrived in the UK in the late 1970s, driven by a desire for better opportunities, yet deeply rooted in the traditional customs of their homeland. For Layla, these cultural expectations shaped her life from an early age. Growing up in a strict Muslim household, Layla was raised with the notion that her duty was to preserve the family's honor by adhering to their values, especially when it came to marriage and family life. Layla was intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, showing promise in her studies, and dreamed of a career outside the boundaries set by her community. But these dreams clashed with the deeply entrenched beliefs of her family. At the age of 24, her life took a decisive turn when her family arranged her marriage to Rizwan Malik, a cousin from Pakistan. The marriage, seen as a binding contract between their families, was less about love and more about duty, a common practice in some conservative Pakistani communities. In 2012, Layla married Rizwan, and soon after, she moved to Pakistan to live with him. It was there that she experienced the full weight of traditional expectations. Her aspirations and the independence she had hoped for vanished as she became confined to the roles of wife and daughter-in-law. Layla quickly realized that Rizwan was not the partner she had envisioned. He was domineering, and their relationship was marred by emotional and psychological control. Feeling isolated and powerless, Layla sank deeper into despair, unable to voice her frustrations to her family, who believed divorce was a disgraceful option. In her heart, Layla longed for freedom. She wanted a life on her own terms, but her family's rigid adherence to custom left her feeling trapped in a marriage that brought only misery. As the months passed, her resolve to break free grew stronger. She made the courageous decision to leave Rizwan and return to the UK, knowing full well the scandal it would provoke within her community. Back in Leeds, Layla sought to rebuild her life. Secretly, she divorced Rizwan through Islamic law, a step her family refused to acknowledge. They continued to pressure her, expecting her to reconcile with her former husband. In the midst of this turmoil, Layla met Amir Shah, a young man of Pakistani origin who had grown up in the UK. Unlike Rizwan, Amir was modern, supportive, and understanding of the struggle Layla faced between her desire for freedom and the expectations placed upon her. Their relationship blossomed into love, and in 2014, Layla married Amir in a quiet ceremony, keeping it hidden from her family for fear of their reaction. Despite the secretive nature of their union, Layla felt a renewed sense of hope. Her relationship with Amir represented the life she had always wanted, a life built on mutual respect and personal choice. But this happiness was overshadowed by the persistent pressure from her family. They refused to recognize her divorce from Rizwan and continued to insist that she return to Pakistan and resume her role as his wife. The tension between Layla and her family grew, threatening the fragile peace she had found in her new life with Amir. Layla's attempts to distance herself from her family's control were met with increasing resistance. In 2016, her father Said fell gravely ill, and her family urged her to return to Pakistan to visit him. Despite Amir's warnings about the potential dangers of returning to a family that had rejected her choices, Layla felt compelled to go. The pull of family duty, instilled in her since childhood, proved too strong to resist. She boarded a flight to Pakistan on July 15th, unaware that this decision would seal her tragic fate. Upon arriving in Pakistan, Layla was greeted by her mother and sister at the family home, a modest residence in Lahore. Her father's illness seemed to have taken a turn for the worse, and she was expected to tend to him, fulfilling the role of the dutiful daughter. Despite the warmth of her initial reception, Layla quickly sensed an underlying tension. Her family's disapproval of her second marriage was palpable, and conversations about her future seemed to circle back to the same demand that she must return to Rizwan. Layla's presence at her father's bedside was also overshadowed by the family's preparations for another event, the funeral of her paternal aunt, which was scheduled for later that week. With so much family gathered in one place, it became clear to Layla that her return was seen as more than a visit to her ailing father. It was a calculated opportunity for her family to pressure her into abandoning her life with Amir and reuniting him with Rizwan. In their eyes, her actions had brought shame upon the family, and the only way to restore their honor was for her to reconcile with her first husband. As the days went by, Layla found herself increasingly isolated. Her communication with Amir became strained. Although she assured him through brief messages that everything was fine, in reality, she felt trapped once again. The subtle threats from her family, particularly from her brother and first husband, grew more ominous. They viewed her presence in Pakistan as a chance to correct what they considered her grave mistakes. On July 20th, 2016, the situation took a horrific turn. Layla's family reported that she had fallen down the stairs at the family home, resulting in her untimely death. Her body was discovered by her mother at the foot of the staircase, lifeless and cold. The news of her death was quickly followed by a hasty burial, organized by her family without any notification to the authorities. No death certificate was issued, and no investigation was launched. Layla's death was shrouded in secrecy, with her family claiming it was a tragic accident. Amir, however, was immediately suspicious. Layla had expressed concerns about her safety before her trip, and now she had vanished without a trace. He attempted to contact her family but was met with silence. Panic set in when he learned of her burial through a distant relative. Amir's worst fears had been realized. Layla's life had been cut short, and her death was far from an accident. Determined to uncover the truth, Amir reported Layla's suspicious death to both British and Pakistani authorities, triggering an official investigation. The Pakistani police exhumed her body for an autopsy, and the results were chilling. Layla had not died from a fall. She had been strangled, her neck showing clear signs of force. It became immediately evident that this was not an accident, but a brutal murder. The autopsy findings confirmed Amir's darkest suspicions. Layla had been the victim of an honor killing, a heinous crime committed in the name of preserving family reputation. The autopsy results sent shockwaves through both the British and Pakistani authorities. The case of Layla Hassan, once dismissed as a tragic household accident, was now a suspected honor killing, a chilling crime too often hidden behind closed doors. In Pakistan, honor killings were still an unsettling reality in certain conservative communities, where family honor was deemed more valuable than the life of a daughter. Layla had become another statistic in this silent epidemic. As investigators delved deeper into Layla's life and relationships, they uncovered a complex web of deceit, betrayal, and family conflict. The examination of Layla's phone records revealed frequent communication with her husband, Amir, in the days leading up to her death. These messages showed the growing strain and fear Layla had felt, detailing her family's insistence that she return to Rizwan, her first husband. It was becoming clear to investigators that Layla had faced mounting pressure from her family, and that her return to Pakistan was never about reconciling or attending a funeral. It was about control. Rizwan Malik, Layla's first husband, quickly emerged as a prime suspect. Interviews with neighbors and relatives suggested that Rizwan had never fully accepted Layla's decision to divorce him, and her subsequent marriage to Amir had only deepened his resentment. In his mind, Layla's actions had disgraced him, and family honor demanded that this affront be corrected. Rizwan had reportedly told several close confidants that he would do whatever it takes to bring Layla back to him, even if that meant resorting to violence. The investigation also focused on Layla's father, Said Hassan. Although he was gravely ill at the time, his influence over the family remained strong. In traditional Pakistani households, the father often holds ultimate authority over family matters, especially when it comes to marriage. Said had been devastated by what he saw as Layla's betrayal. According to those close to the family, Said had pressured his son and other male relatives to intervene, believing that by forcing Layla back to Rizwan, the family's honor could be restored. However, it was not just Said and Rizwan who were under suspicion. The investigation cast a wide net, implicating Layla's mother, Fatima, and her brother, Zafar, both of whom had been in the family home on the night of her death. Investigators began to piece together a grim scenario in which multiple family members had colluded in Layla's murder. There were whispers that this was a planned attack, orchestrated well before Layla had even set foot in Pakistan. The family had created the perfect trap, luring her back under the guise of her father's illness and her aunt's funeral, all while planning her death. As more details emerged, the police began to put pressure on the family. Rizwan Malik was arrested first, taken into custody for questioning about his involvement in Layla's death. During his initial interrogation, Rizwan denied all allegations, claiming that Layla's death had indeed been an accident. His story was that she had slipped down the stairs after an argument, and he had nothing to do with it. However, his calm demeanor and lack of emotion raised suspicions among the investigators. His story also began to crumble under scrutiny, as the physical evidence from the autopsy directly contradicted his claims. Layla's father, Saeed, despite his weakened health, was also brought in for questioning. Though bedridden, his influence over the events leading up to Layla's death could not be ignored. Witnesses claimed that he had demanded his sons and Rizwan take action against Layla. When questioned, Saeed remained silent, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. To him, this was a family matter, and the outside world had no right to intervene. With Rizwan in custody and Saeed under close watch, the focus turned to the other family members, particularly Layla's brother, Zafar. He had been noticeably absent from the investigation, avoiding the authorities and refusing to cooperate. When the police finally caught up with him, Zafar's testimony was vague and contradictory. He admitted to being in the house on the night of Layla's death, but claimed he had no involvement, insisting that he had been asleep when it happened. His evasive answers only deepened the investigators' suspicions. The family's silence and the conflicting stories further fueled the belief that this was a coordinated murder and honor killing carefully concealed under the guise of an accident. But without a clear confession or a solid witness, the case was far from closed. Investigators were left to piece together the events of that fateful night from fragmented testimonies and incomplete evidence. Despite the mounting pressure from the authorities, the Hassan family remained tight-lipped, bound by a code of silence that protected their darkest secrets. However, cracks in their defenses were beginning to show. As the investigation gained momentum, a key witness came forward: Layla's cousin, a young woman who had been present at the family home during the days leading up to the murder. Her account provided the investigators with the breakthrough they needed to push the case forward. The cousin revealed that tensions in the house had been boiling for weeks before Layla's death. There had been numerous arguments between Layla and her family, particularly between her and Rizwan. According to the cousin, Rizwan had made several attempts to coerce Layla into resuming their marriage, often resorting to threats and violent outbursts. Layla had resisted, standing firm in her decision to stay with Amir, but the pressure on her had been relentless. On the night of her death, Layla had confided in her cousin, expressing her fears that something terrible was about to happen. She felt trapped, knowing that her family would never let her return to Amir. Hours later, the cousin overheard a heated argument coming from the main living room, followed by a chilling silence. It wasn't until much later that she learned of Layla's fall down the stairs, a story she had never fully believed. With this new testimony, the police were able to connect the dots. It was clear that Layla had been murdered, likely after a final confrontation with Rizwan and the family. The cousin's account confirmed that the argument had escalated to violence, ending with Layla's strangulation, a deliberate act to silence her once and for all. The evidence now pointed directly at Rizwan Malik, but the complicity of the other family members could not be ignored. Investigators believed that the decision to kill Layla had been made collectively, with each member playing a role in the cover-up. As pressure from the police intensified, Rizwan Malik's once unshakable resolve began to crack. The evidence stacked against him was overwhelming, and the testimony from Layla's cousin had placed him at the center of the crime. Despite his previous denials, Rizwan could no longer maintain his facade of innocence. Faced with mounting legal threats and the possibility of life imprisonment, Rizwan finally confessed to his role in Layla Hassan's murder. However, his confession was not one of remorse, but of justification. During his interrogation, Rizwan spoke with chilling detachment about Layla's betrayal of their marriage and the family's honor. According to him, Layla's decision to divorce him and marry Amir had brought immense shame upon him, as Shimalin, and even the extended Malik clan. In Rizwan's mind, this was not a crime of passion, but a necessary act to restore the dignity of his family. The murder, he claimed, had been an inevitable consequence of her defiance. What was more disturbing, however, was that Rizwan did not act alone. In his confession, Rizwan revealed that the plan to kill Layla had been sanctioned by her father, Saeed Hassan. Despite his ailing health, Saeed had ordered the killing, viewing it as the only way to cleanse the family of the dishonor that Layla's actions had brought upon them. Rizwan had been the one to strangle her, but Saeed had orchestrated every detail, ensuring that Layla's death would be swift and silent, far away from the prying eyes of British law. The confession also implicated Layla's mother, Fatima, and her brother, Zafar. While they had not physically carried out the murder, Rizwan explained that they had been complicit in the plan. Fatima had stood by as Saeed issued his orders, and Zafar had helped Rizwan stage the scene to make it appear as though Layla had fallen down the stairs. The hasty burial, too, had been arranged by the family to hide the truth, burying Layla not only in the ground but under a veil of lies and secrecy. Rizwan's confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. What had initially seemed like the actions of a jilted ex-husband were now revealed to be part of a calculated, collective act of violence involving multiple family members. The case was no longer just about Layla's murder, it had become a stark representation of the deeply rooted tradition of honor killings, where familial duty and reputation were valued above human life. With Rizwan's confession in hand, the authorities arrested Saeed, Fatima and Zafar. Saeed, frail and barely able to stand, was taken into custody but remained defiant. He refused to speak during his interrogation, maintaining a stoic silence that spoke volumes about his sense of righteousness. In his eyes, what had been done to Layla was not a crime, but an act of preservation, preserving the family's standing in a world where honor could not be tarnished. Fatima, on the other hand, was less composed. During her interrogation, she broke down several times, torn between her role as a mother and her loyalty to her husband's decisions. She had loved Layla, but in the end her obedience to her husband and her community's values had outweighed her maternal instincts. She wept as she described the days leading up to Layla's death, admitting that she had known what was going to happen, but had done nothing to stop it. Her hands were tied, she claimed, by her marriage, her culture, and the expectations placed on her as a wife and mother in a traditional household. Zafar, meanwhile, was more defensive. He denied any active involvement in the murder, insisting that he had merely helped his father in what he believed to be a family matter. He claimed ignorance of the plan to kill Layla, stating that he had only followed orders to prepare her body for burial after the accident. However, investigators were unconvinced by his claims, as Zafar had been deeply involved in the cover-up, and his proximity to Rizwan made it unlikely that he had been unaware of the murder. The arrests of the Hassan family members marked a turning point in the investigation. The police now had enough evidence to charge all of them with Layla's murder, along with Rizwan Malik. But even with the confessions and the arrests, the question of justice for Layla remained unresolved. Would the Pakistani judicial system, which had historically been lenient in honor-killing cases, deliver a fair verdict for Layla? Or would the family's influence and cultural norms allow them to escape full accountability for their heinous crime? As the Hassan family awaited trial, the case of Layla Hassan gained international attention. Human rights organizations across the globe began to speak out, condemning the practice of honor killings and calling for justice not only for Layla but for countless other women who had been silenced by their families in the name of tradition. The media coverage in both Pakistan and the UK intensified, turning Layla's murder into a symbol of the broader struggle against gender-based violence and the systemic oppression of women in patriarchal societies. Amir Shah, Layla's second husband, played a central role in pushing for justice. Devastated by her death, Amir became an outspoken advocate for women's rights, using his platform to raise awareness about the dangers women like Layla faced when trying to break free from oppressive family structures. He gave numerous interviews to the press, recounting Layla's dreams of independence and the horrors she had faced in the final days of her life. His grief was palpable, but so was his determination to see the Hassan family held accountable for their actions. Amir's efforts were bolstered by various women's rights groups that rallied behind him, demanding that the Pakistani government take stronger action against honor killings. Layla's case had exposed the gaps in the legal system, where many perpetrators of honor crimes were either never charged or received light sentences due to societal pressure and the belief that such killings were justified under traditional codes of honor. The trial began in early 2017, with Rizwan Malik and Saeed Hassan facing the most serious charges of premeditated murder. Fatima and Zafar were charged as accomplices, accused of aiding and abetting the crime by covering it up. The prosecution presented a damning case, detailing how Layla had been lured back to Pakistan under false pretenses, only to be brutally murdered by those who were supposed to protect her. Witnesses testified to the emotional abuse Layla had suffered at the hands of her family and Rizwan, and the forensic evidence of her strangulation left little doubt about the brutality of the crime. In court, Rizwan remained unapologetic. He reiterated his belief that his actions had been justified, framing the murder as a necessary act to restore his honor. Saeed, too, refused to acknowledge the crime, insisting that Layla had brought disgrace to the family and left them with no other choice. Fatima and Zafar were less defiant, though they still sought to distance themselves from the actual killing, claiming they had acted out of fear and loyalty to Said. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that this case was about more than just Layla's murder. It was about confronting the deep-rooted cultural beliefs that had allowed such a crime to occur. In the months that followed the trial, the case of Layla Hassan captivated audiences in both Pakistan and the UK. The courtroom was packed daily with journalists and activists following every development. For many, this trial had become a battleground between tradition and progress, between justice and the dark legacy of honor-based violence. As the prosecution laid out its final arguments, it was clear that Layla's murder could not be written off as a family matter. This was a brutal, premeditated act of violence, and the perpetrators needed to be held accountable. On the day of the verdict, there was an air of tension in the courtroom. Rizwan Malik stood expressionless as the judge read the charges against him. His lack of remorse throughout the trial had been chilling, and his belief in his own righteousness seemed unshakable. The same could be said for Said Hassan, whose frail body seemed to mask the iron will that had led to his daughter's death. Fatima and Zafar, however, appeared nervous, their faces betraying the fear of what was to come. The judge's words cut through the silence. Rizwan Malik was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison. The court acknowledged that Rizwan had been the one to physically strangle Layla, but it was Said Hassan who had orchestrated the crime. Despite his age and ill health, Said was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his role in planning the murder and forcing his family into complicity. Fatima and Zafar were also found guilty of aiding and abetting the murder. However, given their lesser roles and the pressure they had been under from Said, they received lighter sentences of 10 and 8 years, respectively. The verdict was a landmark in Pakistan's legal history, a rare case in which an honor killing had been met with full legal accountability. Justice had been served, not only for Layla, but also for countless other victims whose deaths had gone unnoticed or unpunished. For many in the courtroom, the verdict brought a sense of closure. But for Amir Shah, it was a bittersweet victory. Though he had fought tirelessly to bring Layla's killers to justice, no legal ruling could ever bring his wife back. Still, he took solace in the fact that Layla's death had not been in vain. Her case had sparked an international conversation about honor killings, forcing governments and communities to confront the harsh realities of gender-based violence. In the weeks following the trial, Layla Hassan's story continued to resonate around the world. Human rights organizations hailed the verdict as a significant step forward in the fight against honor-based violence, but they also warned that the battle was far from over. For every Layla, there were countless other women who suffered in silence, unable to escape the oppressive traditions that sought to control their lives. In Pakistan, the case led to renewed calls for reforms in the legal system. Though the laws surrounding honor killings had been tightened in recent years, many loopholes remained, allowing perpetrators to escape punishment through familial forgiveness or societal pressure. Layla's death had exposed these flaws, and activists used her story to push for stronger protections for women. Back in the UK, Layla's family's home in Leeds became a stark reminder of the tragedy. Her mother and brother had returned to the UK after serving their prison sentences, but the weight of what had happened never left them. Fatima, in particular, was haunted by the memory of her daughter and the choices she had made. She had been a silent witness to her husband's tyranny, but in the end, her silence had cost her daughter her life. For Amir, life without Layla was a constant struggle. He remained in the UK, continuing his work as an advocate for women's rights. He established a foundation in Layla's name, dedicated to supporting women at risk of honor-based violence. Through this work, Amir found a way to channel his grief into something positive, ensuring that Layla's legacy would be one of hope and change, rather than just another tragic statistic. Layla Hassan's story became a symbol of resistance for women trapped in oppressive familial structures. Across Pakistan and the wider Muslim diaspora, her case was used as a rallying cry by women's rights groups who saw in her the embodiment of the struggle for autonomy and justice. The image of Layla, young, educated, and determined to chart her own course, stood in stark contrast to the traditional values that had led to her death. In the years that followed, the Layla Hassan Foundation expanded its work, providing legal aid, shelter, and counseling to women escaping abusive situations. The foundation partnered with international organizations, and Amir traveled widely sharing Layla's story, in an effort to educate communities and governments about the dangers of honor killings. The laws in Pakistan, too, began to change. By 2020, new legislation was introduced to close the loopholes that had previously allowed perpetrators of honor killings to escape punishment. Although cultural change was slow, the legal reforms were a significant step forward. The government began to prosecute honor killings with greater severity, and public awareness campaigns were launched to challenge the toxic ideas surrounding family honor and women's autonomy.